All right, we might get started, guys. Last session. We've got 3 speakers lined up for today, so they're each going to have some presentations of around 15 to 20 minutes each, and then we'll have some questions afterwards. So our first speaker is Ian Clark. Ian is the Director of Flow Transportation Specialist, a transport planning consultancy based in Auckland. Ian has 26 years' experience in transport planning and modelling, both in the UK and in NZ. He has been responsible for the transport assessments of a range of major transport projects, including assessments relating to Auckland City Rail Link and the proposals for an additional crossing of Auckland Harbour. He's had active roles in various components of the New Zealand Government's roads of national significance, and Ian is also chair of the NZ Mugs. So I welcome Ian Clark.
Good afternoon. That bio left out one very important sentence at the end. I'm an avid English cricket follower. But I promised not to do any cricketing gags today, so yes, exactly, time's up. Many of you were around on Wednesday, so unfortunately you will hear a very similar presentation, given that this topic is exactly what I presented on Wednesday. There are subtle differences, so I'll try and keep you awake. This bit some of you have heard before. NZ Mugs was set up in 2008 particularly for 2 reasons only. One was the perceived lack of microsim guidelines in New Zealand, and the other one was there was also no guidelines which we wanted on peer reviews. The guidelines that we did have on models, they hadn't been changed since 1998, which means they predated any microsim, and therefore there was the gap. That's the final version. It ended up being a joint project between the NZ Mugs and the Transport Agency. They finally ratified the document, and you need to check inside the front cover. The date needs to be July 2014, so make sure you're looking at the right version. Now, the guidelines do have a subtle different approach, and it's all around the model types. Most guidelines you'll see are specific to microsim, to meso, and all the rest of it. Here we're talking about 7 model types that cover different model purposes or different geographical areas. So that's the area I think is a bit different, and I therefore suggest it's worth thinking about. So here are those 7 types. I say it's a subtle difference in approach because type A is a 3 or 4 stage regional transport model. You wouldn't microsim that, so therefore type A is fairly software specific. Similarly, some of the ones down the bottom of the table there, they're much more geared towards the microsim type things. However, type C and D are much more murky. It probably gives you a level playing field if you're tendering for a project and someone's going in with a Saturn or whatever against someone in microsimulation. They therefore will have the same validation targets, whatever software is being used. There is crossover between these categories. I mean, type C and D look remarkably similar. I say that the Transport Agency was heavily involved in this project, and they wanted a particular category which covered their projects. So the validation targets are slightly more strict for type D than for type C. However, there is a particular clause in here which says that the validation targets relate to the area of interest and not necessarily to the whole model. So just to demonstrate what this actually means when you go through, on Wednesday I showed you one table, and here I've gone to about half a dozen just to show the concept. So this relates to total flows across screen lines. So the further right you go, in some cases it's almost not relevant to have screen lines for tiny models. But apart from that, you can see that the targets get more strict for the more detailed project purpose. We did take guidance from everywhere else, including Australian, UK, you name it, and the figure you'll see for 60% or greater, that actually comes from the old New Zealand manual, when we were trying to make sure we weren't totally reinventing what had been used for a while. Although it is a slight change that we're now talking about GHs of 5, and often the other guidelines talk about GHs of 4 across screen lines and 5 everywhere else. Never quite sure about that. So that's the first one, which is talking about total flows across screen lines. If you take that through to then individual counts across screen lines, you'll see that the targets are slightly higher, firstly between the first table and the second, and then as you go from left to right. And you can keep going, and now you're into, sorry, that didn't move. That's the third one. There's then a different set of targets for turning movements or one-off link counts that don't relate to screen lines. And by this one, you'll see there's no targets for regional models. We're not expecting regional models to be validated to turning flows, for example. But you'll see across the right, the targets are now fairly strict, although in many cases they're not quite as strict as the RMS Australian guidelines. So these first three tables relate to the GH. I'm assuming most of you know what that means. There's also a set of guidelines that relate to the absolute differences. Some are expressed as within a certain percentage, and some are within an absolute value. And again, for screen lines, we haven't got targets for the more detailed models. I went beyond that one. Has anyone seen the deliberate mistake? This is copied straight from the guideline, and I'll highlight it for you. Apparently, some of the categories are more than 100%. I'm not quite sure how we achieve that. It's also a good lesson. This thing got reviewed by so many people. It got ratified by some formal committee by the Transport Agency, and we still have a target of more than 100%. The validation targets for journey times, this is pretty standard around the world. The 15% or 1 minute, you'll find that in the UK and I think in the Australian. Again, it's the same concept. The more detailed the model, the higher percentage of routes you should be targeting to hit this standard. The last few years of these workshops have coined this phrase valibration, the blurring of calibration and validation. There is a section in our guideline on that because that practice is definitely frowned upon in New Zealand. There is an emphasis on retaining independent data. On Wednesday I mentioned to you that there's also concern by a small but vocal minority about the use of estimation, and people were talking about this issue this morning. Some models you review and you can immediately tell that they've done too much estimation because the validation is almost perfect, and that can't be right. And immediately I smell a rat and think, actually, how have you got to that perfect validation? The chances are they just matched a matrix, they matched the flows, and then the matrix almost has no validity anymore. So there are guidelines around how you limit the extent to which estimation has been allowed to control the matrix. When these guidelines came out, the change of emphasis, apart from the model type, was more on common sense. Is the model fit for purpose? And have you achieved good or excellent validation within that area? That is probably giving more emphasis on the modeler's intelligence and use of brain power rather than just, we're not trying to create modelling by robots. It implies people actually need to think about what is the model purpose. And this can be quite awkward. In 2 or 3 years' time, the client might just say, can you roll out that old model you did for that job down the road and do it for a different job? I'm sure the answer will be yes, you can, but you need to make sure before you go too far, although the model's been validated once, it's been validated for a different job. Is it still valid for this second purpose? In some cases, you're not quite sure of the purpose when you build the model. That's an awkward thing to do, but you need to make sure you then retrospectively check the validation in due course. Now, as Peter and David have said, I have represented the New Zealand mugs in the Australian committee, and I think I've been of use for one thing only, which is we've made lots of mistakes, and we can hopefully pass those on. And the biggest mistake well, help you learn from those mistakes rather than pass those on. The biggest issue we had in these guidelines, the NZ Mugs developed a draft set of guidelines, and about the same week as we circulated it, I received the New Zealand Transport Agency guidelines on the same topic. We'd failed to get buy-in for the major client who'd gone ahead and done his or her own thing without us knowing about it. It wasn't a disaster. We got together and we've cobbled together the best bits from both those documents. But for a place the size of New Zealand, it was crazy to have two documents on the same topic that were overlapping. So you pretty obviously need the buy-in from both sides. You need to make sure the consultants also think that what's being put forward is reasonable. Having said that, someone's dropped something there. Having said that, you never get consensus. On a totally different project, I was involved in setting parking standards for a certain development area. And within one day, I had someone telling me there was too much parking, and the next meeting, there's not enough parking. That's a fact of life. You never get full agreement. And in developing these guidelines, occasionally someone came up to me and said, I've given feedback on the draft and you've ignored it. Well, the chances are it probably contradicted feedback from somebody else and you couldn't please both people. So that's just an awkward fact of life. There was one particular modeller who's a very senior practitioner. He actually stood up at the NZ Mugs conference one year and said he deliberately had not read the guideline. He knew there was enough people involved, and having too many cooks, he was just happy to get it finished, and he would then test it and give it a good go. And actually, I thought that's quite a novel approach to actually accept and trust other people's judgment. We weren't doing things that were silly, and we're now out there. But the next thing is that guidelines need to evolve. There is a clause in our one saying we expect it to be reviewed within 2 years. For example, for my own practice, I found there's a table in there for validating low-trafficked roads. Now, the GEH deliberately says that it's a method of actually finding that's not that important. So with a low error, so a low flow, you can accept a fairly low error, and the GEH value is quite low, whereas in a percentage sense, maybe quite high. So there's targets in there which I found difficult to match, and it may be, if other people agree, that the next version might take that into account. We'll see. So in conclusion on these guidelines, I haven't come over here to tell you that we've got it right and you guys have got it all wrong, but here is a slightly different approach. And I think it's one worth thinking about to try and give greater emphasis on the model purpose rather than just the model software. Now, I alluded to the next bit on Wednesday. I'm always concerned, and Robert this morning said exactly the same thing, that we spend far too long on the validation, calibration, and not long enough on the forecasting. So surprise, surprise, where to next for Mugs is really looking at forecasting. At which point in time, it is time for a plug. I've used a corner of Robert's table at the back to give out some of these, or leave them there. That gives the details of registration for a conference in Auckland in September. And the theme sounds remarkably similar to what I'm just saying there. The theme is The Uncertain Future, a focus on model predictions. And our guest speaker isn't Robert Bain, but Pilo Williamson, who is another heavy hitter in this area. And there are, when we set a theme, you're always dependent on people coming in with topics that reflect that theme. So Pilo is attacking it straight on with demand uncertainty. There's a presentation on the client side entitled Traffic Forecasting and Soothsaying, Is There a Difference? Slightly skeptical title. There's also a presentation from a consultant which is, But You Can't Handle the Truth About Uncertainty. So those two, combined with the hour-long presentation from Pilo on this subject, should be quite interesting. That's all I have. Short and sweet.
Questions at the end. We'll have, thanks Ian, we'll have questions at the end. Our next speaker is actually a last-minute replacement. unfortunately, Chris Seto couldn't be here for a few reasons, but he has a very suitable replacement from the Roads and Maritime Services, Emad Awadala. Emad works at RMS in the role of Leader of Network Analysis, who are responsible for the advice and delivery of models in New South Wales. Emad has 25 years' experience in many types of models and is currently leading a range of mesoscopic modelling at RMS. He has experience in both the private and public sectors and has a balanced approach to delivery of these models. I welcome Emad to talk about New South Wales guidelines.
Okay, I'll speak about the modeling guidelines RMS developed in New South Wales. I expect most of you already have seen it. It was published in 2013 for more than 2 years now. So I'm not going to talk long. The presentation may take about 10 minutes or so. I'll start with this saying: all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I expect this is the reality, because it's very hard to get a model which we can say it is representing the real life of all aspects. So what we need to do here, we need to make sure that the models are useful. So this is why we're developing guidelines. We're trying to achieve the purpose of getting a good model, or model fit for purpose. The objectives we're having for these guidelines, the first one is assist with the model selection and the use of the model, because the project managers need some help when they decide which model can be used. And as well, sometimes they come to a consultant and ask him, we need to do that, what sort of modeling we need? So this is the first purpose, to assist with the model selection. We choose the suitable model for the objective of the study. The second one is to provide criteria for models calibration and validation that are achievable, because some criteria aren't, or we can't get it for a reason or another. And in doing that, each section was written by an expert consultant. So it wasn't written by RMS staff, it was written by an expert consultant, and then it was sent out for consultation. Unfortunately, we didn't get comments back, except one. And the last objective was to ensure consistency in modeling, make sure that we're all using the same guidelines instead of using different guidelines, and make sure that the model fits for the purpose so it can give us answers to the questions we are asking. The model guidelines document has two parts. Part A is the modeling methods, and part B is the modeling guidelines. The modeling methods is sort of introduction, and it helps the people who don't have a lot of experience with the modeling, as well as the project managers, like introduction to modeling process, the levels of modeling we're having. But this guidelines was published again in 2013, so it's missing the mesoscopic modeling. And the use of modeling, the model selection guide and process, and the modeling brief. And usually this is for government, whoever commissioning a study can have some sort of example and guidance on how to put a brief together. And then other sort of stuff like the public transport and the active transport. The second part is the modeling guidelines, which are having different levels of modeling. The first one is demand modeling, which covers the 3 steps of the 4 steps modeling: traffic generation, traffic distribution, and model split. And then we jump to the 4th step in the highway assignment modeling. In RMS, we don't do demand modeling. We focus on the other levels of modeling, like the highway assignment modeling, micro simulation, lane sig corridor, CEDAR intersection, and here we're having now the new version of CEDAR, which is CEDAR network, so it should be under corridor modeling and SCAT-SIM modeling. I'll talk about just two small things in the guidelines which usually overlooked when studies are done. We are mainly focusing on the traffic operation more than the forecast. We use the forecast, of course, but most of our focus is on the traffic operation. So we are very interested in the concept of core area. The core area usually, it's the critical area we are looking at. So we would like to make sure that the model's accuracy in this area, in this critical area, is very high. This is why we're having a strict calibration and validation targets for the core area. I put the table here. We don't have to go through it all, but we can see, for example, if the flow is less than 99 vehicles per hour, we need the difference between the model and the survey to be within 10 vehicles, which is very strict. From 100 to less than 1,000, we are talking about 10%. From 1,000 to 2,000 to be within 100 vehicles. Again, it's very strict, but for smaller studies and when we are focusing on operation of a specific area, we usually achieve these targets. Many of the micro simulation models we are doing, we are applying this for the area of interest, and we are trying to do something similar for IMSAN if we are looking at specific areas, but it doesn't have to be the same criteria. The second thing which we focus on when we get travel time data, the travel time survey, how we do the validation, and this is again for the micro simulation modeling, it's not for all the other types. Usually we get the travel time data and we say this is the average time and we compare it with the average modeling and we say it's within 15% or 1 minute, whichever higher, and that is good enough. But when we're talking about traffic operation, it may not be good enough. So we usually ask to have the travel time survey for small sections between separate intersections. So we make sure that the delay at intersection can be picked up in this survey. So, and after that, we need to plot a cumulative graph of travel time and the distance, like the graph we're having here. It's very useful, really. When we look at this graph, we look at the section, which here number 5. This section, we can see that there is a problem with the model. This section, the travel time is starts with very close to the model and then deviates a lot from the model. So we can tell here the model is the red line and the survey is the blue line. We can tell here that the model is not showing the delay or the congestion at this section of road. If we fix this one, for this example, the travel time will be very good and will have a good fit with the survey. So this graph is very important. We usually ask for it because it helps us to understand what is happening at which section of the road. Here I finished talking about the current guidelines because, as I said, I think all of you have seen it, and there is no need to talk about these current guidelines a lot, but we will move on to the updates or what we're planning to do and the future development. The mesoscopic modeling guidelines, which is very important to us now. We already developed a draft mesoscopic modeling guidelines, and Jacobs developed that for us. It has two main sections. The first one talking about the model development guidance, which is very close enough to the micro simulation modeling. It doesn't have a lot of deviation from micro simulation modeling. And then the assignment methods, which here, of course, quite different from the micro simulation models, but yeah, it has some similarity with the strategic model as well. So it's a mix. And then calibration and validation, and we will stop at the calibration and the validation a bit and see whether the criteria we got are achievable or not. And I think there will be a lot of discussions regarding that. And then it talks about the hybrid modeling. These are the meso modeling guidelines we having, the criteria, the targets we having. Again, we split it into for network-wide into two sections, for network-wide and for core area. For network-wide, we can look here. It's more relaxed than the micro-simulation. Sometimes it's close. So we are talking about the G statistic for link, 85% less than 5, and 0% more than 10, which I'm not sure whether it's achievable or not, but again, it depends on too many factors like the model size, how big is the model, is, and the amount of congestion happening inside this area. All of this have great impact on the model performance. And we need also to have some comments. So if we have GH less than 10, where it happens, where, and some sort of justification, and whether this is included in the core area or the area of interest to the modeling or just away from the core area. We need again to comment on whether the observed count is very low, less than 100. And we need to make sure that all the movements are included with the exception of band movements. Here band movements, sometimes the model have a mistakes and just allow the turning movements where it's band. And then screen line, we're having a criteria for screen line and for the linear regression. The core area targets here are more strict. Link or turn GHD 100% less than 5 and 65% less than 3. And the linear regression R square more than 0.95. Again, I think we will need to have a discussion and see whether these targets are achievable or not, because if it's not achievable, there's no point of just including this in our modeling guidelines. Again, it was done by a consultant. We didn't do it. We said, okay, we are going to include commission consultant because they do the work, so they should have some sort of idea about what is achievable and what is not achievable. Okay, this is about the meso guidelines. We'll talk about the blend updates. The first update incorporating the meso guidelines in our document, but I think the targets may need a review because we include these meso guidelines. As well, we need to update some parts of the guidelines because there's a lot of developments happened in the modeling and the softwares as well, like the CEDAR network now exists, so we need to include it. We need to update Linsig part. We need to update the model selection guides. Another important point here is the induced demand. One of the things which is important, especially when we adding new parts of the network, like adding a link, tunnel, whatever, we are investigating different methods of applying the induced demand and included, and this should be included in the next update of the modeling guidelines. Our strategic model, which is highway assignment model, it's not a forecast model, it's a highway assignment only. It's being updated now for Newcastle and Wollongong, so the model will include Sydney and extend it up to Newcastle and down to Wollongong. Once this is done, it will be recommended instead of using separate models for Wollongong and Newcastle. Future developments. The first one is Guide to Transport Generation Development. It's a separate document, but all modelers or most of us really use it all of the time. So this modeling is being updated now, and there are a lot of technical directions to update trip generation rates. And once it's updated, the guideline itself will be updated, which will help us. We are trying to include the modeling itself as a step in the project development pack we're having in RMS. So all the project managers need to know when they can use modeling, when it has to be done, and how it has to be done, and who you can contact. So at the moment, it's not part of the project development pack, project management pack, so this will be included in the future. The last thing is research for key modeling issues like the peak spreading. It's a big issue now, getting demand or sub-area demand from the strategic model and then putting it into meso model, and then the model cannot handle all of this traffic because it's more than the capacity, and all of the strategic models are not capacity constrained. So it's a big issue now. Whenever we get the future year forecast, what we're going to do, but real life, this could spread over time, or anything else will happen. So, yeah, one of our future development is to have research to get some sort of methodology or approach to deal with peak spreading. I think I finished now. What I would like to do, we are happy to receive your feedback, and if you feel that we missed any topic, again, we're happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emad, and we will probably get some feedback after the next speaker when we have Q&A time. Dr. Wesley Sowett, or Wes as he's often known as well. As a Transport Modelling Manager at Main Roads WA, Wes has taken a leadership role in the discipline of transport modelling both at the state and national level. At the state level, Wes has led a talented team at Main Roads to develop a new multimodal strategic transport model, ROM24, which was a critical role in enabling the strategic road planning and network operational planning functions at Main Roads WA. At the national level, Wes has been proud to contribute to the steering committee such as Austroads Economic Evaluation Task Force and for the updating of the ATC's national guidelines for transport system management. Welcome, Wes.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for the opportunity today just to take you through the process that the ATC has gone through in revising not only guidelines for modelling, but also the national guidelines for transport system management in Australia. You might be familiar with the national guidelines. They're on the internet, but the previous edition was published in 2006. The parameter values in that version are now outdated, of course. Those guidelines lack recent developments, particularly in the fields of cost-benefit analysis, particularly for wider economic benefits and analysis of active travel. To address that, a stakeholder consultation was undertaken in 2012-13, facilitated by GHD, to identify where the gaps were in these national guidelines for transport system management. As a consequence of that, a work program was developed and a steering committee was formed, and it's become a TISOC initiative to pursue the update of the national guidelines, and it's funded jointly by Australian federal and state government jurisdictions, and funding also from Austroads. The timing of it, you might be up to date with this, but the draft of Stage 1 was released for public comment December last year on the interim website, whose address you can see down below. And we received quite a variety of comments coming back. There's actually 5 streams of work with comments on each stream. I was fortunate enough to get most comments related to demand modelling, which was good stuff. Shows everyone's passionate about modelling out there. That's great. That Stage 1 refresh, and the refresh was, the aim of that was to incorporate as many of those comments that would fed back to us as possible. That refresh went online in its current form, April 2015. And I really would recommend that if you haven't done so already, that you visit that website. There's some good information there, particularly if you're interested in transport planning at the different levels. The alignment. The motivation behind the project was at the point there was two key guidelines that were coming up for renewal. One was two OSTRO's guidelines. You may be familiar with the Guide to Road Project Evaluation, which consisted of 8 parts, or in particular you might be familiar with at least Part 4, particularly if you're involved in the calculation of a benefit cost ratio from your transport modelling outputs that contains the unit rates. So that's probably what most people think of when they hear about updates to the guidelines. The second OSRoads guideline that was due for an updating was the Guide to Road Transport Planning. And at that point, Infrastructure Australia was also looking to update their guideline as well. Peter Tassato from South Australia saw the opportunity at that point that with these 3 documents needing to be renewed, that perhaps they should be done in alignment. And that was the genesis. I remember that meeting well where Peter put that proposal forward to make this alignment possible. If you'd like some more information about the alignment of these documents, there's some web links there for you to have a look at. That's a lot better. Okay, I just thought I'd just touch upon, given that it may be of interest to you, about the updated parameter values that have come out of one of the work streams. Formally, as mentioned, you would have sourced, most of you, Part 4 of the old OSRoads Guide to Project Evaluation, which was typically updated every 2 years with updated unit costs. Now, this time it's been updated under the badge of the ATC, and if you go to the website, you can download a copy of the new guidelines there. Currently, work is in progress to derive public transport unit rates to be used in a benefit cost analysis of public transport projects. And we're dealing with comments now fed back to us on those values. Similarly, the work on deriving some parameter values for active travel are being developed in the consultancy, so you can expect those to come on board by next year. Similarly, values for rail, the environmental externality values are also being worked on. And the intent is that by keeping this document separate in the suite, that those values can be updated regularly in a similar way to they were under the OSRoads system every 2 years. So check it out if you wondered where Part 4 went to. You're still using the old, was it 2012 version? You can find somewhere else to go. Just quickly, I won't dwell on this, but just for your information, if you're calculating safety benefits from your modelling outputs, I'll just mention that in the parameter values on the website, you'll see both willingness to pay and human capital unit costs for crashes. And it was a recommendation from the National Road Safety Strategy that the willingness to pay methodology would be incorporated. Hasn't been officially implemented through the OSRoads program, but those values are there for your use if you need them. Okay, so just getting back to the demand modelling side, Stream 5. Essentially, as mentioned, there was bits of modelling guidance in 2 key sources. One was as I mentioned, the OSRoads Guide to Project Evaluation, and there was bits and pieces in those national guidelines as well. So stage 1 really, I suppose what the focus was on was just pulling the relevant portions out of those document streams to try and put it to some sort of cohesive framework, rebadge it as the ATC guidelines. Now, if you've had a look at it, and I've received comments from some of you on that, you'll notice that the guidance is targeted at a very high level. That's with references to more detailed material. It's not really our intent initially to drill down and provide you with, or the ATC to provide you with specific detailed guidelines to do with validation or calibration criteria. It's just meant to be a higher order reference document. But if that demand is out there, which I think I'm hearing, it's need that's come out in this conference, I can certainly take that to the steering committee. The focus at this point in that document is in the urban context. Freight demand modelling is not yet available. It's a complex area, and when we're going through picking out the bits and pieces out of the Austroads and the ATC document, there wasn't a lot to do with freight modelling in those documents. So a new document will have to be written. Stage 2. What's happening with Stage 2? I referred to that period of public consultation, 2012-13, facilitated by GHD. What came out of that facilitation was 3 key areas that the stakeholders expressed that they would appreciate extra information. 2 of those. The first one was transport land use interaction modelling. How can we model the interaction between that? In particular, there was some advice on how to model the induced demand, and also that also needs to be coordinated with another stream, which is on planning in that context, planning around that interaction between transport and land use. So as part of the Stage 2 procurement that will be going out soon, we'll be looking at obtaining that advice for modellers to be able to model this interaction. Another interest that was expressed at that stakeholder consultation was advice was requested on activity-based modelling, and in particular how we can prepare for the potential onset of activity-based modelling in the future. So some time has been allocated to provide some initial advice in that area. That's 2 components. Now, the other general component of that public consultation was that people just in general wanted more, just general knowledge to support transport modelling. Now, from the comments, I mentioned that Stage 1 involved collating the comments received once these documents were posted on the internet. I suppose 3 big themes came out. Since 2006, obviously, our hierarchies of modelling have changed, and people were requesting more information on modelling, particularly in the mesoscopic area and microsimulation also. Not just in terms of calibration and validation, but also at when should we use these types of models, and particularly in relation to cost-benefit analysis as well. So that will be part of the procurement to go out to obtain that advice. Another key area suggested for improvement from those who provided comments was that, hey, the 4-step modelling approach is outdated. You need to consider a 5-step modelling approach. If I had I see that diagram now, and I wish I had a copy of Ben's diagram from the other day with his 5-step model. That was really impressive, but I don't. So be assured that part of that consultancy going out would be to obtain advice and guidance for 5-step modelling. Of course, you'd be shocked to hear that nobody asked for additional guidance on model calibration and validation. That's acknowledged, so that will be a key part of this consultancy as well, for the consultants to go away and come back with improved guidance for those different hierarchies of modelling. And it may not be that, it may be that whether that's references were pointed to certain existing documents. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel. If there's some good guidelines out there, we need to use the public's money effectively, it may be possible that the guidance will refer to an established set. We'll wait and see what the consultancy comes up with. I should go back. No, I'll go forward. So the future, what's next? So stage 2 of the guidelines is planned for release in 2016, not too far away, and it's intended it will be a living document. We're not going to go, here you go, good luck, we'll see you again in 10 years' time, which is what happened last time, apparently. So it's the intention it will be a living document, and it will continue to evolve to incorporate new research and new developments. And of course, the parameter values will be updated regularly. I might go, before I get into that, I mentioned research. There's the sort of research projects that will be undertaken shortly. If you're interested in values of travel time reliability, there's a major research project being funded by Ausroads, which will be managed by the steering committee to obtain those values, and also a proper for travel time value distributions as well, which could be useful in those travel time calculations. So there's some, and that's quite a large budget for that project. So Ausroads is getting on board to fund that work. Okay, what is going to be included into the stage 2 document based on the comments that were received, and some of you provided these comments to us. What will happen, we'll provide a new section which sets the scene, what is the role of transport modelling, when should it be used, the types of modelling. I'll be asking for a consistency check of what's been written to ensure that there's no glaring errors in there. Also be asking for the consultancy to provide us with current relevant citations. You may be aware, if you read, there's nothing younger than documents referenced to 2002 in there. That's not really good enough. So I'll put that challenge out there as well, to give us current reputable sources that we can refer to for particular topics. There, of course, will be material provided on 5-step modelling, the modelling hierarchies, mesoscopic modelling, microsimulation, and advice on calibration and validation. Also, a big chunk of that will be on modelling that transport and land use interaction, also including the modelling or advice on how to deal with induced travel demand. And we'll touch upon activity-based modelling. There hasn't been much of the time allocated to that. Now, I've added my email address there. You might be passionate about some of those topics. I'm planning to put that procurement out in I've decided to hold, based on what I've been hearing here at our conference, to hold it off for 2 weeks, to give you guys an opportunity. If you've got some current citations or material that you think should be considered to go into the stage 2 update, please send me an email. I'll be happy to take that and provide that to the consultancy who'll be doing that for their consideration. So if you'd like to take it, I think I can convince the committee to postpone it for another 2 weeks if you'd like, if you can put us onto some good material that you think should be considered. And that's where I'll finish it. Thank you.
All right, I might ask our 3 speakers to come up the front. There's a microphone up the front for the answers, and hopefully we get some good questions from everyone. And everyone's ready for the end of the day. I'm going to kick off. Oh, I just would like to. I know we've touched on it a little bit today. The data, and Ian and Emad probably more so is how much do the guidelines touch on the suitability of the data and you know, how valid it is?
I think our guidelines don't touch much on that. There's talk around this independence of data. I'm not sure there's much talk around, is it okay to carry out counts on different days and all that sort of thing. Clearly it's the biggest source of error is not necessarily the model, but having a bunch of inconsistent counts. And therein lies part of the challenge of modelling when flows are so variable. I think that is probably the next buzzword coming up soon is around not modelling the average day, but looking more at unreliability. People don't mind arriving a minute late to work or to a meeting, or rather they do mind. The issue is they have to allow more time to get there in case, so they don't like unreliability.
Our guidelines talking about what type of data is required for every step in modeling, like what is required for model calibration, what is required for model validation, which is different. Of course, we can't use the same set of data, but usually we use the count data for calibration of the model, and then we use the travel time survey and looking at the signal data for validation, the delay at intersections. So it touches on the data, but not in deep. It's talking as well about the origin destination survey. It's needed in some cases, but it's not sort of standard, so it left it to the project manager or whoever is doing the modeling.
You'll notice in the old guidelines there's some material on say, household travel surveys, for example. That is outdated. There's not enough funds to do a big update of that this time around, but it's anticipated for future evolutions of the document. There'll be more current survey type data specifications or requirements put into that.
Yep. Peter.
Let us talk about, when we're talking about the core area, could be 3-4 intersections. So it doesn't have to be the whole model. It's just the area of interest to us, the critical area to us. And looking at the micro simulation models, we achieved that especially when we are talking about small models, not big models. Okay. The main idea is to make sure that the parameters we are using in the model are somehow suitable for the conditions, for the traffic conditions and the network conditions. So the problem of having too wide range or relaxed the criteria too much, the parameters used in the model could be not good enough to represent the traffic conditions.
If you've got to fine-tune those parameters so much to get them to match that, then why do you have any confidence those parameters are going to be applicable in the future?
Yes, you are right, but no one knows about the future. But we have something to make sure that it's okay. At least we have the existing situation, so we need to...
It seems fundamentally deceptive. I mean, it seems as though you're claiming something that in fact you can't achieve. But, you know, if you've got to adjust all of your gap acceptance parameters and you know, individual lane capacities and all that sort of stuff to get it to fit
not really. We don't go this level really. What we found is there are many things in modeling overlooked, like what? Coding the signal settings. I'm talking about traffic operations, so very low level. Coding the signal settings most of the time is not right. Many of the people doing the signal settings don't understand how the system is working in real life, so they don't do it the right way. There are other things like using fixed time signals when it's adaptive in real life, but it depends on the situation. Some are close, some aren't.
Aren't those all things you could check before you compare with the traffic counts? I mean, what you're saying is if the signals are coded incorrectly, surely that's a data auditing check you should do before
Yes.
you do any modeling.
Yes.
It's a healthy balance to be struck in this. I mean, I've had this debate a lot. I started in micro, I've then gone on to feeding micros from resource for meaningful scheme assessment. The thing that used to annoy me a lot was that you sometimes had an idea that because micro was so micro and detailed, that it had no use because one of the arguments which we offered was there's so many micro parameters, these things will change in the future. The first thing I thought was nobody said they won't. But the point is that if something becomes so multifaceted that you walk away from it and you do nothing, that it's the alternative, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a healthy balance. And I think,
What I'm saying the right response is to acknowledge that you haven't got that accuracy.
yeah.
To pretend that you have that accuracy and then to give some idea that you're going to have that confidence in the future just seems to me unfounded. Make your best estimates of those parameters. Let the dice fall where they will, you know.
I think it's about having the guidelines
Just-
and having the context that helps qualify it.
This is good discussion, and I'm just conscious of the time. We've got time for a few more questions. Alex.
I have a couple of comments on that. First thing, yeah, I understand the needs to get a certain level of validation. I'm sometimes afraid of the over-calibration, where basically we're trying to match a set of data that are very specific, that are not exactly of the future. So I just give an example in which, for example, we have a customer to calibrate a model in San Diego, for example, where they were calibrating the data of a couple of Tuesdays. But the third Tuesday in the database was not matching the validation compared to the first two Tuesdays. So the real days between them don't match the validation. So that's one of the key points, which drive me to the second comment, which is I think also maybe where we are lacking is there is some models that are deterministic and some that are probabilistic with some stochasticity. And maybe this is also where we miss a bit the point. We did a study, for example, in France in a freeway where basically every morning the queue can be 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 5, 2.2, 2.8. So basically what they requested from the model is if I run 10 times the model, I want the queue to be more or less between 2 and 4 kilometers, not 2.14 kilometers, which is the average of the length of the queue. So I think this is one of the aspects maybe we miss in the stochastic models compared to the more strategic that are more like very deterministic, but the answer is unique.
Does any of you guys want to add anything to that?
Well, that and other things we're missing out on. Backcasting to me is very important. So all this stuff around validating to a current set of data and we can't validate to the future, we can validate to the past. So testing whether the model adequately reflects the effects of a project you actually can measure is a good test you can do. Second thing is I often recommend people do shock tests. So if you build a forecast model that's 3 months after the base, only then when you look at the forecast with logic congestion, you see where the model wasn't very good. You find where you've misset a parameter because congestion appears in an unlikely place. If you find that out at the base model stage, then you found it out early. Because otherwise you're adding in changes to your future model that maybe should have affected the validation in the first place.
I'm a believer in model parsimony. I mean, a model has to have a balance between accuracy and forecastability. So I'll take those comments on board with that procurement that we need that guidance on obtaining that balance. If you over-calibrate a model too much, it's not good for anything, really.
I've got a question at the back. Yeah, I think what you're which is a bit conflicting to what we've just been talking about, over calibrating, and you're saying that we need to calibrate better. Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone? I mean, I know we've sort of touched on this. Is there any further comments that?
Balance is important.
Yeah, balance is important. Thank you. You've already said something, Dave. A lot. I think Tony's got his hand up, so. So is that a comment or a question? Yeah.
Well, I think it appears we've sort of got that anyway. I like to think of two definitions, a guideline and a specification, maybe talking about a general guideline, and maybe each jurisdiction has a specification. These are the results and the outcomes that we require from you. So I certainly see the role of the national guidelines is to provide that overarching advice, which we need to get consensus from all the authorities, which is a joyous thing, as Ian has mentioned. So I think there's a difference between guidance and if jurisdictions want to set their own specification, which I think some have, that I suppose that's up to them.
Rob?
Question for Ina. I noticed the updated guidelines have a specific reference to an area of interest with the scoping model. How do you plan to define what the area of interest is? Generally, when we talk about the scoping models, we're looking at a wider area, not talking about a couple of intersections. So is there going to be a guideline in terms of how to define area of interest?
Yeah, it depends on the project. Like, for example, sometimes we use the mesoscopic modeling to look at the rhombus with the freeway. In this instance, we are interested in the traffic operation at this rhombus. So, what we do is to have the micro simulation pockets at this rhombus, and then it will be specific to those ones, not the whole model. So, when we are talking, for example, about Sydney CBD, we cannot do it because the model is too huge and all of it is core area. But it's not practical, and we know that quite well. We know that it's not practical for a big model. So this is why when we're talking about the core area, it has to be small sections, including intersections. Yeah, small areas, I mean. So, it's not heading to micro-simulation, but as you know, meso now is used as a mix. It's not just a meso. So for example, you did the CBD, it was purely meso. Many of the models now having these micro-simulation pockets for the areas which is critical to the project. So when we look at these micro-simulation pockets, we need it to be highly calibrated. Again, if these are not achievable, we are happy to change. The guidelines are just a draft for mesoscopic modeling, and we are happy to change. But we make sure that we used all what we can do to get a good model, and then we can change it. It's not something, it's not specifications. It's just guidelines to guide us. And if we can't meet it, just say why.
Two more questions. Dave, one, and then two over here. Yep.
So it was a question initially for Wes, but also the full panel, and it was great to see the mention of land use in the presentation. And it's not even my question, it was a question which we didn't have time to squeeze into the panel session earlier. The one question we didn't get to was, what can transport modelers do to
That's the perennial question, isn't it? I can't provide advice there. I suppose we can work more closely with them in testing their scenarios, but I really don't have an answer. But if someone does, please let us know in Western Australia.
Is the interaction part of what you're pulling together?
Yes, not the actual forecast themselves.
Yeah.
Which I thought that was the main thrust of the question.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have any advice as to how land use forecasts can be more accurate.
I just chip in by saying that I think economists and land use planners make transport modelling look very precise. Their work is often very, very vague. Again, it comes into you're going to need to do a lot of tests on the forecasting to get more than one version of the future if you're not quite sure around your future land uses. An example for that, I'm aware of one regional model in New Zealand where there is much more employment land zoned than there will be employees. So you often have to pick a winner in terms of the land use you assume to be included. That will be the wrong answer for some projects, so you're going to need more than one version of the future. That's all we can do. We can give the range of answers rather than over-depend on one single set.
Last question.
Just make one last comment on land use. I think as modellers, we take on the inaccuracy of land use information in our especially in demand modelling, and I suppose in relating that to what Robert Bain's been talking to us about, maybe we need to be more upfront in communicating errors in land use forecasts and how they impact upon our modelling, and not take upon the burden of the inaccurate forecasts as part of our outputs.
All right. Can I just put our hands together to thank the three last speakers? We've got